This is a special meeting of the Council which has been called in terms of Standing Order 6.6. We have 3 reports before us. The first from the proper officer confirming that the requisition meets the requirements of Standing Order 6.6. The other 2 reports address the issues raised in the requisition. Alec, can I have the Sederunt and Apologies?
Thank you, Leader. I have apologies from Councillor Brodie, Councillor Collins, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Mayo, Councillor Prentice, Councillor Stitt and Councillor Diggle. There are 40 members present.
Thank you. Can I have the declarations of interest? Ian?
Thank you, Leader. I will declare an interest on item 5 for the fact that my partner, Sidki, works for that cast. And although this discussion has got no financial implication to his particular project, however, I feel I should leave. Thank you.
No other declarations of interest? Okay. Right, we move on to item 3, which is a requisition for the special meeting. It's a procedural report for noting. Can we note that? If we move on to item 4, this report addresses the first part of the requisition, and the advice of the proper officer is that for the reasons detailed in his report, the request in the requisition is no longer competent, given decisions taken by the Education on the 31st of March 2015. It was open to members to recall the decision of the Education Committee in terms of Standing Order 18, and I am advised that this has not been done. We therefore have a decision competently taken by the Education Committee, and the requisition does not challenge this. I'm accepting the advice of the proper officer, and therefore, as this requisition is no longer competent, I wish the committee to note it.
Point of order, Chair. Under 10.1.2, and specifically referring to where the Education Committee obtained the power to make the decisions that they did, and where's the audit trail to prove this?
The situation is that the Council fixed its budget on the 5th of February. That budget, once fixed, is delegated to the appropriate committees to administer the budget. The Policy and Resources Committee subsequently received a report regarding the finance settlement, and the Policy and Resources Committee, which does the budget monitoring on the part of the full Council, determined that the matter should be referred to the Education Committee for their consideration. The Education Committee considered the report and came to a decision on the 31st of March. The audit trail is there.
Okay. Right.
Can I just come back on that, please, Leader?
No.
Well, to be honest, the full...
You've had the advice from the proper officer, and he's saying, that's the reasons. He asked for the reasons, he gave you that reasons. If there's another additional point, you can come back.
Well, the additional point is neither the full Council minute nor the draft minute of the Policy and Resources the following week delegated any such power for the Education Committee to actually deal with policy development funding.
The budget, including policy development funding, when it's determined by the Council, is transferred to the appropriate committees under the scheme of delegation for the administration of the budget. The policy development funding was included in the budget. Having said that, the matter went before the Policy and Resources Committee, which determined that the matter should go to the Education Committee, and the instruction to the Education Committee was that they were to determine how they could meet the £606,000 shortfall. The Education Committee received the report, and the Education determined how they would meet that £606,000 shortfall, all from within the policy development funding of budgets available to the Education Committee.
Sir, if I can come back in on that one again.
Colin. Excuse me. Colin.
Chair, I attended the Policy and Resources Committee on the 17th of February 2015. The report very clearly stated that the Director of Education would bring a report to the Education Committee addressing the funding shortfall while maintaining teacher numbers. That was in the report. It was noted. I didn't hear a single alternative proposition put forward by any other group rejecting that particular motion, so I don't understand why a decision taken in February is now being challenged And I also note that not a single alternative proposition was put to the Education Committee by the SNP group on the day. But it was very clear, members in this room at the Policy and Resources Committee on the 7th of February were very clear that a report was coming to Education Committee. Otherwise, why would a report been presented?
Okay, Jane.
Thank you, Leader. I think what perturbs members is that they were expecting, I think, options to be presented at the Education Committee, and at Policy and Resources Committee, it was never absolutely made clear to us that there would be no possibility of discussing the policy resource funding, policy development funding. The independent group did actually ask, Leader, that various suggestions would be considered, and were surprised to find that they were not brought forward in any shape or form. I think there were other options considered, and what we haven't got the chance to do here is to consider the different avenues that were possible. That I think is what it disturbs members, that those other avenues were not open to us.
I'll bring Alec in this, but my understanding of it was that the remit to education was directly to do with education. The proposals put forward by yourself were a decision on family centres, on social workers in school, and on money for buses. So they had nothing to do with that. That decision was actually taken by the council, not passed on to education to make that decision. Right.
I don't think I've anything to add to what you said, Leader. Councillor Maitland received a fairly full response to her query. There was information passed to the Director of Education suggesting that various avenues be used to resource this. These did not fall within the Education Committee budget and were not within the Education Committee's determination and delegation. The matter was therefore put forward to the Education Committee for their consideration.
Ivor?
Thank you, Chair. It's quite specific under 3.1.4. There is no provision within standing orders to recall a report. However, under, I think it's 18.1, as it says there, there is to recall a decision of a committee. Now, my understanding, that hasn't happened. Therefore, there is no option for us other than to note the report.
Okay, I'll let Ian in, and I'm going to
Thanks, Leader. I mean, I understand it's a difficult position that you're in, Leader, but the only thing I would say is that reflecting back to the 31st of March at the Education Committee, I did ask, because the motion came forward with an amendment whether we should defer the actual item to this committee today or to the full council today, and I did ask for clarification at the time on whether it would still come, doesn't matter what the decision was. I say, I think you were there actually, Leader. It doesn't matter what the decision is what I asked, will we still see this at full council? And the answer was yes. So therefore there was an expectation that we'd be able to see this today. Now, if the answer had been no, unless there's a requisition, we would have put a requisition order in to being able to see this and hear this today. As you know, I voted against here at the Education Committee. So the information that I asked for was quite clear. Would it still come to full council? The answer that I got back was yes. And if it had been no, unless there's a requisition order would have went in on that decision.
There was a vote in that, and I think you lost the vote. Right.
No, Leader, it's a different point I'm making. As I'm saying, I see it is an absolutely different point. There was a motion, and it was heard. It was heard at the Education Committee. But what I'm saying is, I'd asked for clarification on whether it would still come to full council. The answer I got was yes. Therefore, because I got a yes, the requisition order didn't come in. But everybody in the committee would have been aware of that.
Jeff?
Leader, unless Councillor Carruthers is reading a different set of papers from me, item 4 is this paper, so it has come before full council.
Ivor?
Chair, my recollection was that we were given these papers electronically. I can't remember if it was a Wednesday or the Thursday, which was within the timescales to actually have the requisition for 12 signatures. I think it's 48 hours from the end of the meeting. The papers were there. This paper stated that it wasn't the proper standing order to be called under, and 18.1 was, and we got that sanctimoniously to allow a requisition to be called. So I'm still of the opinion that we should note this and move on.
Okay, moving on. We're moving on to item 5. I'm noting that. Okay, moving on to item 5. This is impact of welfare reform and advice services and report by Director Community and Customer Services. This report addresses the second part of the requisition and provides very detailed information on the advice services available through Dumfries and Galloway in relation to addressing the impact of welfare reform. In particular, it also sets out the accessibility of these services and their capacity to deliver the level of support to our most vulnerable citizens in relation to debt and welfare reform. It also details the action being taken by our Council to address the effects of living in poverty, which will be the subject of a major strategic report in July of this year. I specifically requested the report makes reference to a national report commissioned by the Citizens Advice Scotland from the Fraser of Philander Institute, and the report is here for noting. Rob?
Thank you, Leader. I welcome the report in line with the requisition. Do have a couple of issues, and I will be brief. It is our understanding, based on the information we have, that the Fraser of Philander Institute did indeed calculate specific economic value and contribution of advice services to the regional economy. We've seen this. We also understand it was widely circulated at the time of publication. Had I been aware slightly earlier that that had not in fact been picked up, I would have happily sent it on to officers, and indeed will do so now. Leaving that to one side, the issue of capacity is the other one that I want to focus on very briefly, as outlined in the requisition. The report refers to it. We are now in a situation where there will be, for example, no Saturday provision with any CAB office in the region, no evening service anywhere outside Dumfries. Our concern is this risks having a disproportionate effect on the more rural parts of Dumfries and Galloway, where, as we recognise, travel to access services can be a significant problem. I think everybody welcomes and supports the creation of the anti-poverty strategy for this region, but I think it's remiss for us to frame our consideration of that strategy. I welcome the very major report that is going to come in June, but I think there would be an issue if we were to consider that without recognising that we started this financial year with a reduction in the services we commission, which equates to 936 hours. These are the organisation's figures, not mine. 22% of reduction of our previous commissioned capacity. This is an issue, I think, about the amount of capacity that we commission. The purpose of this requisition, therefore, was to highlight to the Council information which had not been available, for example, at time of budget setting, has not entirely been covered in this report, as I say, the specific regional economic contribution, which is an omission we're happy to address. And also, I think, to see these considered in the wider context, both of welfare reform and the forthcoming Council anti-poverty strategy. So with that in mind, I'm noting the recommendation to note in the report. I would like rather to move the following. The Council refers the issues of the economic contribution of advice services, as outlined in the November 2014 Fraser of Philander Institute report, and their capacity to meet demand in an equal manner across the region, to the Welfare Reform Subcommittee, for it to consider in light of the Council's forthcoming anti-poverty strategy and the unallocated balances of specialist commissioned advice services policy development funding. I've got a typed out version of this for Mr. Haswell's benefit. I would be happy to move that.
Right, thanks for your brevity. John, do you want to pick up any of the points in that? I do know that, that you talked about accessibility of services. Then, for what I can gather, there's Dalcast is unable to provide any profile customer contact data to evidence on the level uptake during extended opening hours. And that's over the last 2 years. So, I mean, there's no data to evaluate the benefit or demand within that. And DACAS has stated that the Saturday morning demand is 4 clients per week per area. So I do also know that Citizen Advice Services provide a national service for out with hours up until 8 o'clock at night. I think it is 7 days a week. So for that, and they provide information to everyone from in a national level. The current contract, he talked about the current contract. The current contract for DACAS is £824,000 core budget that has not been cut. In fact, it's been increased by the money was spent before that, before DACAS got a contract, was £756,000. And that's a 9% increase in that. In addition, the council's Fiat team, they have a budget of £504,000. So there are plenty of advice out there. But I'll let John come in with details.
Thanks, Chair. Just maybe in response to a couple of the questions that Councillor Davidson addressed, in terms of the specific additional benefits that have been delivered as a result of both the Commission Service and the Internal Service. The figures that we have are that at the end of Q3, the Commission Service, which is the DACAS service, the value of additional benefits that they've achieved is £6.1 million. The annual figure is £9.5 million, and they're on target to achieve that. In terms of the Internal Service, that's the Fiat team, the target was £6.4 million, and the full year additional benefits is £7.2 million. So taken together, there has been obviously very substantial additional benefits realised through the work of both the services, in excess of £16 million. In terms of accessibility and opening hours, I'd refer members to paragraph 3.4 of the report and a final bullet point that says that it's part of the specification from the original tender, which is that the provider will look for opportunities to extend provision beyond the minimum specification, and variations to the core hours specified above will be considered on the basis of evidence, client need and demand. And those discussions are obviously picked up through the regular monitoring reports that we have with the contractor. So there is flexibility within the contract to vary the hours of operation, but that would need to be done by agreement between the council and the contractor. Thanks, Chair.
So there is flexibility within that, and they can, yeah. So the others can change as well. So. Okay. Ian.
Thanks, Chair. There's just 2 or 3 things that I'd like to note within the terms of the report in seconding Councillor Davidson. 3.2.3, it does say that there was a 9% increase between 2012-14, but I think this is an example where figures can sometimes be a little bit askew if you look at it with comparisons with other occasions where, like, for example, there was a 20% decrease in the last financial year. And 3.3.4, this is where I have a big problem with, because I think since many of the welfare reforms came in and the level of debts that these kind of services are dealing with now, it says here that sorry.
Yeah, thanks for that. I just want to make, you keep referring to this 20% decrease, and we've got to correct you. You've said that a few times, and it's been before. There's not a 20% decrease. The actual funding for DACAS is 800, and that hasn't changed, and it won't change. That contract is until 2017. So there is no 20% decrease. They had commission services for a year at a time, yeah, and that's come to an end. But that is a yearly contract, if you want, outside services. So there's no 20% decrease. I know that some people like to peddle that, but it is not a decrease.
I take your point. But if I could refer to the 3.3.4, because I think this is a very fundamentally important thing.
There's a decline in both the demand for service and the amount of debt being managed. From what I understand, the complexity of these cases is increasing the amount of time that each advisor has to spend on them. And I'm a little bit concerned that we're making an assumption that there's increased levels of debt and it's not currently supported by the evidence. Any statements of that nature should be supported by evidence, and I'm concerned that there's not actually a monitoring of the type of cases that the DAGCAS, for example, and any other debt advisors are actually dealing with. So I really think that when we're doing that sort of monitoring there, that's a very important issue, and it's become so in the last few years.
I'll let John in on that. Yep.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the monitoring arrangements, the monitoring arrangements were set out in the specification and agreed in terms of the kind of performance information that we were seeking. We look for the number of money advice cases, and we measure the number of new cases and the number of cases carried forward. And in terms of support of the statement to 3.3.4, the report at the end of quarter 3 showed a comparison between 13-14 and 14-15 figures. In 13-14, the average new case per month was 118, and that's reduced to 103 for 14-15. So that's the evidence that we based the statement on. It's not a significant reduction, but it is a reduction, and obviously that's what we look at in terms of the pattern of demand.
I think there may be an issue that we do carry on here as well. That you talked about monitoring. I don't know, but I'm not in the welfare reform subcommittee. We have a contract. We have with the DAGCAS. Within that, I don't know, on a personal level, if all these things are being complied with. There are. I'll give you an example on staffing. I don't know if undertaking the duties specific to the role of that, whether that's monitored or not, or what capabilities they've got within that, or checking for training and the staff and various other things within the contract. I don't know if that's ever been asked for the council. I know it's in the contract. I know that there are other issues within that have a monitoring basis, and I don't know where that goes or if it's done on what regular basis it's done on.
Thanks, Chair. The monitoring arrangements are delegated to senior officers, and we meet on a quarterly basis. Some of the monitoring information is picked up as part of the CCS business plan performance reporting, but there is no specific bespoke reports to members of the Welfare Reform Subcommittee or any other subcommittee in terms of this specific commission. There are key PIs relating to value of debt, number of debt cases that are picked up through the CCS business plan performance reporting.
Okay, it may be worth having a look at that and see if there's, we've got a welfare reform subcommittee there as well, so it may be worthwhile having a look at getting these kind of reports in. Fully?
Yeah, Chair, to the point you're making, and indeed the point that John made in terms of there is no bespoken report that is put to the Welfare Reform Subcommittee. I think it would be worthwhile that we did have that going before, because tying that in 3.3.4, where it is referring here to, for money debt advised, DAGCAS have reported a minimum decline. Undoubtedly, the work of the Council and indeed the £50 million that was made available from the Scottish Government in terms of the bedroom tax did mean that the people weren't coming forward. Indeed, there was no reason for them to come forward, so they believed. But that we are not out of the water in respect of that the legislation has not been repealed. So we could be returning to that. And it's really to tie in 3.3.4 to what John has referred to in section 5 in his last bullet point, that this has still got flexibility. In terms of my understanding is that DAGCAS are having a reduction in staff because of the contract that was awarded, notwithstanding what you have already said under 3.2.3. So in that respect, to the number of hours that may be required, if there was that flexibility, then we need to be assured that that is still possible. and that there's equity of service across the board where it is necessary, Chair. So it might be for the report to go back and for some clarification and confirmation gained from a report, the bespoken report that John has alluded to. So that there is a monitoring that both organisations are aware of and can feed into that, and that would be helpful in my opinion.
Sorry.
I don't have a problem with some of the comments that have been made so far. What I do disagree with quite substantially is the attempt to take this item in complete isolation of almost every single decision this council's taken in the last few months in relation to tackling poverty. We agreed as a council to develop an anti-poverty strategy that is being reported in July, and that will cover a whole host of areas. Not only that, as part of the budget setting process, the administration budget, now I appreciate the SNP voted against it, but the administration budget set aside very substantial funding to implement that anti-poverty strategy. And one of the things that was contained within the policy development, which the SNP voted against, was a very clear statement that said that the challenges facing a rural area in delivering advice are something that will have to be tackled within the anti-poverty strategy reporting in July, and that's why funding was set aside for that. Now, there'll be a whole host of demands placed on that funding when that report comes forward, and a whole host of recommendations, and to simply take one in isolation, I think is completely unfair. Part of the funding, I would add, for the anti-poverty strategy was additional funding that was left over from policy development, so I'm not entirely sure where Councillor Davidson gets the funding from, but I think to take this item in complete isolation of every decision we've taken before is wrong. I would also question the suggestion that should go to Welfare Reform Subcommittee. Welfare Reform Subcommittee does look at welfare reform. It does not look at the commissioning process. It does not look at this individual contract. I'd also remind members that this council has a number of organisations that provide advice services, including the council's own service, but including a number of organisations that have contract awarded by the Housing Subcommittee in relation to advice as well. So I'm a wee bit confused as to why, when we've got a very clear process that members agreed to develop an anti-poverty strategy that will report in July, members want to cherry pick one individual item as part of that process. I simply don't agree with that. And you know, if Councillor Davidson's moving a motion, I'd be happy to move an amendment that simply notes the fact the decision of full council to develop a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy which will report in July, and note that as part of the budget setting process, substantial funding was allocated towards that strategy.
Okay, was that Archie? Yeah. So Ian, I'll let you back in now.
It's just a question, actually. Do you know what the figures are for the expectations of the in-house advisors compared to those of DAGCAS? How many cases are they expected to do within terms of the commission? How many are the council advisors expected to do within the same time period?
I don't know why there's an assumption here that, you know, I think, and it's a wrong assumption that this money, if there is any money, that would automatically go to DAGCAS, and it wouldn't. It's not the way we commission services, so it wouldn't automatically go to DAGCAS. John?
Thanks, Chair. I haven't got the figures specifically in relation to the question that Councillor Dick asks, but I'm certainly happy to provide that to members after the meeting.
Could I just say, Chair, that under no circumstances am I suggesting for a minute that it's DAGCAS or there's an expectation to allocate that to. All I'm doing is asking, as the Commission service at present, how many are they expected to, as opposed to our in-house ones there? But please don't misunderstand me. I'm not making any expectation of awards.
We've got a motion. We've got an amendment. Oh, was Councillor Davidson second? Oh, sorry. Do you want in? Sorry, John. I didn't see you there.
I just want to, I mean, obviously we haven't seen what the motion actually says, and it would be useful to see that before we go any further.
Okay.
Councillor Davidson seconded.
Were you seconded?
I don't think it was.
Okay. I've actually asked for copies of it to get done, so that's. Well, that'll become the motion.
Leader, would it be appropriate to take 5 minutes to be able to read this?
I think it's pretty plain. I think it's very easy to read in.
Chair, can I just check the exact wording of the amendment as well, please? Because I think there was something else added in. It's not just to note the report, there was something else added in.
Okay.
Thanks, Leader. I have the amendment typed up if members wish, but it's fairly short. Assuming I can read Councillor Smith's handwriting. It's to note the decision of the full council to develop a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy, which will report in July. Note the decision of full council that's part of the budgetary that's part of the budget. Substantial funding was allowed for the next 3 years to support that strategy. Is that correct, Councillor Smith? Yes. Allocated. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. Ready to go to the vote.
Thank you, Leader. The motion is by Councillor Davidson, seconded by Councillor Dick, and all members have a copy before them. I'm sorry, I'll defer to the member, despite the fact you've started the vote, Leader.
Well, actually, I was going to suggest that I didn't see any need to divide. Unless I've missed something, neither of these are not mutually exclusive. You could have both of them. There's absolutely no reason to divide on this. If one was willing to accept that each of the statements made are perfectly valid, I don't see why there's any need to divide on it at all. If you had you could run them together. Unless somebody can explain to me why these are mutually exclusive, I would suggest a counter-amendment suggesting you have the whole thing together. Note them both.
Councillor Smith.
The reality is that the anti-poverty strategy is going to report to the relevant committee that won't be the Welfare Reform Subcommittee, which deals with a very specific area. And the amendment here, the motion here, seems to refer the entire commission of advice by this council to the Welfare Reform Subcommittee. That's not the remit of the Welfare Reform Subcommittee. It also allocates funding, when in fact we've allocated substantially more funding to the development of the anti-poverty strategy. I don't believe we should be taking the anti-poverty strategy and the advice issue in complete isolation. I remind members what it actually said. If you look at the budget template that was agreed for the anti-poverty strategy, it states very clearly it is recognised that in a rural area such as Dumfries and Galloway, there are significant challenges in ensuring that people facing poverty have access to sufficient support and advice, in particular in more isolated areas. Meeting that challenge will be a key part of the forthcoming anti-poverty strategy. And I just repeat the point, it should not be taken in isolation. We have to look at the whole strategy in the round, including advice services and including tackling fuel poverty, tackling child poverty and every other recommendation that comes for that strategy. And that's not, frankly, a matter simply for the Welfare Reform Subcommittee to take on its own.
Okay, I'm not going to open it back up, but Jill.
It was just to check the competency of the motion then. Because if the remit for the subcommittee doesn't allow for this to be done there, then I mean, I know we could change the remit, but the remit would have to be changed at full council. So is this motion that's in front of us competent?
A very good question. I think that it's within the power of the council, if it adopts this motion, this piece of work would go to the Welfare Reform Subcommittee as an individual issue. As Councillor Smith has stated, it can't be considered an individual issue. It would come forward as a report in its own right, because it's only asking for a report to go to the Anti-Poverty Strategy Subcommittee. The council could ask them to do that as a one-off piece of work, and then the issue in relation to the anti-poverty strategy will be coming to the Welfare Reform Subcommittee anyway, so it can be dealt with in that way.
Go to the vote.
Chairman, just to remind members, if you're ready to proceed to the vote, I can find my paper. The motion is by Councillor Davidson, seconded by Councillor Dick, and is as written down. The amendment is by Councillor Smith and seconded by Councillor Dryborough, and the amendment is to the effect that the Council should note the decision of full Council to develop a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy which will report in July. Note the decision of the full Council that as part of the budget, substantial funding was allocated for the next 3 years to support that strategy. Are you ready to proceed to the vote, Leader?
Amendment.
Amendment, thank you. Deputy Leader?
Amendment.
Councillor Bell?
Motion.
Councillor Blake?
Amendment.
Councillor Carruthers?
Motion.
Councillor Karen Carruthers?
Motion.
Councillor Carson?
Amendment.
Councillor Davidson?
Motion.
Councillor Dempster?
Amendment.
Councillor Dick?
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough?
Amendment.
Councillor Dykes?
Amendment.
Councillor Foster? Councillor Geddes?
Motion.
Councillor Gilroy?
Amendment.
Councillor Groom?
Motion.
Councillor Hislop?
Amendment.
Councillor Lever?
Amendment.
Councillor McCaughtry?
Amendment.
Councillor McClung?
Motion.
Councillor McComb?
Motion.
Councillor McCutcheon?
Amendment.
Councillor McGregor?
Amendment.
Councillor McKee?
Amendment.
Councillor Maitland?
Abstain.
Councillor Marshall?
Amendment.
Councillor Martin?
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholl?
Amendment.
Councillor Ogilvie?
Amendment.
Councillor Peacock?
Amendment.
Councillor Scobie? Councillor Smith? Councillor Syme?
Amendment.
Councillor Tate? Councillor Stephen Thompson?
Motion.
Councillor Tuckfield? Councillor Witts?
Motion.
Councillor Wood?
Motion.
Councillor Wiper?
Amendment. One abstention.
The amendment is carried by 23 votes to 15, there being one abstention.
Okay, I have no other items of business. Gail?
Can I ask a pertinent question, how much it's cost to hold this meeting today in officers' time, preparation of reports from matters that should be discussed elsewhere?
Sorry, can you keep quiet, please? There's a councillor speaking. Have respect in the chamber. Sorry, can you ask that again, Gail?
I would like at some point an amount of how much it's cost to put this meeting on today for matters that could and should have been discussed elsewhere.
Okay, we'll get that back to you.